The quarterfinals for IEM Oakland are upon us, and thanks to the schedule, there is a day off before this match, so we've got all of today to think about it. So I thought I'd do some analysis on what the quarterfinal matchups will likely be, how they will play out. This also provides a classic opportunity for the community to wreck me in an entirely unreasonable manner, like when, for example, at ESL Cologne 2015, I did a video like this where I broke down all the playoff series and what I thought would happen and the possible picks, and I ended up reading the psychology of some of the teams correctly and the patterns that they go with. I managed to predict a bunch of the matches correctly, but since Cadian actually watched my video and then said the same things on the stream, there were people who just had mega upvote comments saying actually that everyone must know these, they're very obvious, and even Cadian had said them on stream. So whatever, I don't mind if people get it right, that's good. Let's just go for it and see what we go here. So first matchup is SK Gaming versus G2, and this is obviously a rematch of the match we saw at Epicenter in the same stage of the tournament, and the winner will play Astralis. The second match is going to be Immortals versus NIP, a matchup we've essentially very rarely ever seen. I mean, we saw it in the final of DreamHack Summer, but those are different lineups because obviously Pith was in the lineup back then and is now just come back, but Immortals now has Steel, whereas back then they had Showtime. And in fact, I've had a different player since Zeus. So let's start with the SKG2 one, the one we know a little bit of the history of, and see what can happen with this. Because the interesting thing about SK's map pool, Train's still godlike, Overpass still very good actually, Dust 2's improved, which is made up for Cobble being a bit shaky. Unfortunately, Mirage has gone to shit. Nuke is terrible, they haven't won on it basically in recent form, and Cash is their permaban. But so it basically, when it's SK, you know they're going to pick Train or Overpass, and they're just going to dictate it to their opponent. Now, in terms of G2, they're a team who, amazingly, Nuke's got very good for them, actually. They've improved on a lot, and they've had to, because obviously we know that their Cobble and Train have been a bit wonky. Dust 2, classically, their strongest map, still very strong for them. Cash has actually fallen off quite a bit. That used to be their second strongest map, like a really good map for them. Overpass is still in the middle. Train is terrible right now. Do not play Mirage. So we've got two teams who do not ever play a certain map, Cash and Mirage. In terms of the maps that G2 picks, G2 tends to pick Dust 2, but they will also vary depending on opponent, and they always ban Mirage. So when the two did meet at Epicenter, what happened was SK picked Train and they 16-0'd G2. G2 picked Dust 2, which is, you know, down the lower end of SK's map pool. G2 won it 16-10. The decider was Cobblestone, and as in the SK era, Cobblestone was a classic map to help them close out series or get them a key win in series, and they won this one 16-11, and SK went on to the semis where they obviously lost to Virtus Pro. Now, last time that played out, they did just both remove their permaban, Cash and Mirage for SK and G2 respectively, and then they picked Train and Dust 2, strongest maps for each of them after what's remaining. Now, what's interesting is, I actually think both teams are not going to pull a curveball on this one. I think both of them are scared enough of the other person picking the map they're not comfortable on that they will just do the permabans. SK will permaban Cash, and G2 will ban Mirage. Now, sure, the guys from SK could look and go, oh, the form of the guys from G2 has fallen a bit on Cash. Doesn't matter. G2 would very likely pick Cash, which SK don't want to play. Likewise, G2 could look at Mirage and goes, wait a minute, SK is 1-4 in the last 5 on it. Doesn't matter. If you never play Mirage and competitive players, G2 don't, you don't want to be playing it. So I think you get normal permabans, which means I actually think we're going to get exactly the same series. I think we're going to have SK pick Train. I mean, they are absolutely bonkers on this map. They've won the last 7 in a row. In fact, their last 14 in a row overall, but the last 7 of the period I was checking, which is the post-Cologne era, the last 14 times in a row they've won this map on LAN. G2, I think, will pick Dust 2 because even though it is improved as a map for the guys from SK, it's still a map that if you're G2, you're still pretty confident on. You know, you don't tend to lose this to many teams, and even when you lose, you get double digits. Like, this is still a pretty solid map in theory for you, although they have actually been losing. A couple of those losses were fairly recently, so you could think that could be in the back of their minds. But the problem is, since SK will ban Cash, what is the option here, right? I mean, the option, obviously, is that they pick Nuke, right? That's what I would actually do if I was G2 here. I would pick Nuke, which you've won 5 of your last 7 on, including the last 4 in a row. Meanwhile, the guys from SK have lost the last 4 times they played Nuke. So I personally would pick Nuke. The problem I have is if you look at recent tournaments, there haven't been any Nuke picks for G2. So they have improved on it recently and they have played it a bunch recently. So look for that as a surprise pocket pick. They could pick Nuke, but unfortunately, if they go with Comfort, I think they will pick Dust too, which then means SK can ban Nuke, which then means G2 ban Overpass, and then we get the decider of Cobblestone. So in that world, I have SK taking Train, almost certainly. Bad map for G2. I have G2, actually, I think they can squeak Dust 2. I think that'll be close, but I think they can win that one. And then the decider Cobble, I'm actually going to go ahead and give over to the guys from SK. I still think it's a decent enough map for them. Now, the interesting thing is, if the guys from G2 pick Nuke, the problem is I don't see it mattering. Like, yeah, I think it makes it more likely they win their pick, but the decider in that scenario will probably still just be Cobble, because then SK, instead of banning Nuke, will just ban Dust 2. So I have SK winning that series 2-1 and going to the semis. Immortals versus NIP, a matchup, again, like I say, we haven't really seen, even though these two teams have been top 10 ranked, just because of how it's worked out in terms of them not meeting up in playoff series. So NIP, obviously, the thing that's a bit wonky with them is they've just brought Pith back for this tournament, so all the past results over the last few months were with Makalele, so it makes it hard to know that their map pool's the same. But recently, Train's been pretty solid for them. Nuke, they've won the last 4 in a row and has become a very good map. Dust 2's still pretty solid. Overpass is in the middle, but pretty decent. Cash is average. Cobble's on the lower end, it's having some issues there, but admittedly only really losing to the elite teams on Cobble, so still playable. Nip's map pool, adding in the Makalele, is actually pretty solid right now. They can play a lot of maps, and they always banned Mirage. And at the moment, the trend looks like, with all the wins on Nuke, if they think an opponent can't play Nuke, they're going to probably pick it. Now, over on Immortals side of things, again, we're having to count the map pool when they had Zeus in the lineup, because they haven't really played many tournaments with Steel. They only basically played iBuyPower Masters in this tournament. So Cash, they're undefeated on, but they only played 4 times. Mirage is still pretty good. They're winning most of their games there. Cobble's still pretty good. Classic map for Immortals. Overpass is okay. Train's okay, but their losses are really only to C9, which in theory are a good Train team, so I think that's not that bad. Train and Overpass in the middle. Nuke don't play, basically, and we played it once, lost it to Echo Fox. Dust 2 do not play, lost it to Astralis. They always ban Dust 2. That's the key thing about Immortals. So they have a permaban as well. Just like Nip always bans Mirage, Immortals always bans Dust 2. And in terms of picks, interestingly enough, the guys from Immortals were very diverse. Now, admittedly, some of that is when they had Zeus, and I think that was in general his philosophy, as you saw when he was in SK. But in general, they ban based on the opponent in terms of, rather, they pick based on the opponent, what they think is going to be their strong map. So I think it plays out like this. I think the permabans come in for obvious reasons, because for NIP, you know Mirage is one of the better maps. Immortals, it's their most played map. They win 2 out of 3 games on it. In general, they've won 6 out of the last 9. So you know Immortals will pick it, and they've won the last 4 on it. So you've got to ban it if you're Nip, and you don't play it anyway if you're Nip. So you're going to ban for comfort. Now, Immortals are going to ban Dust 2 because, again, they don't play it. They're not comfortable on the map. And actually, NIP's won 3 of their last 4 on it. And the only loss was to C9, who's not a bad Dust 2 team. So permabans are almost certainly going to be Mirage and Dust 2. Now, picks, both of them have an option here where they can go with a different pick that I would probably do, but I don't think they will. So I think that NIP will just straight up pick Nuke, because Immortals have played it once, lost it to Echo Fox, but since Immortals bans Dust 2, Nuke's going to be available. Nips won their last 4 on it, admittedly some of them with Makalele, and I think NIP is one of the stronger teams on this map. They're good on both sides of the map. I think that's a very strong and a very safe pick for them, and I would pick it. But the other thing they could do is they could pick Train, because NIP has won the last couple on Train, and we know that in theory the guys from Immortals are like decent on Train. Now personally I wouldn't go with that. I would go with the Nuke pick myself, but that's just a possible curveball that Exist could throw into my ever-loving mouth. Then you've got Immortals. I think Immortals will pick Cash. I mean, they've won the 4 times they've played it. Mirage is already going to be out of the equation. And we know in terms of NIP, they've been dropping off a little bit on Cash. Admittedly, the old Pith lineup was the specialist one on it, but they still have lost sometimes on Cash. I think Cash is the one that I expect them to pick from Immortals. But the option is, if they want to go with a classic comfort pick, now like I'm saying, the old Immortals with Zeus picks based on the opponent's weaknesses. But if they go back to the old Immortals way of wanting to pick comfort, then maybe they pick Cobblestone, because that is a map where this is, yeah, it's a classic Immortals map. They've always been good on it. My problem with that is they've lost 2 of their last 3 games on Cobble. So if I'm them, I don't do that. And in terms of NIP, I think think Cash is a bit weaker for NIP. I think if you look at it, NIP's won 4 of their last 7 games on Cobble. Well, those 3 losses were twice to SK, who's actually been reasonably solid on that map. Not great, but reasonably solid, and some of those were back when they were seemingly a better team, like earlier in the year. Well, I mean, I say like a month ago, 2 months ago, you know how many tournaments have been. And one was to Virtus Pro. Virtus Pro are monsters on that map. So I actually think Cobble's much more risky than Cash for Immortals. So I expect the picks to be Nuke pick for Nip, Cash pick for Immortals, which then I think leaves the obvious, which is, by the way, they're just going to ban the map that the other team could have picked there. So NIP will ban Cobble, Immortals will ban Train, and the decider almost certainly will be Overpass. Now, interestingly enough, if Nip does pick Nuke, I actually have Nip winning that pretty heavily. I think they'll smash Immortals on that. That's a clear win for them. If Immortals pick Cash, now I actually do think Nip can certainly play this map. It's interesting that Immortals won't have so much scouting because Nip will have Pit back in the lineup. But I do think that Immortals will edge that map. I think that their new lineup's pretty solid. I think Bolts and Steel are playing fairly smart. And I think they're a different team. They're not the Chokefest that was the past Immortals. So I actually think they'll edge that one. But that's the tight map in the series for me, is Cash for Immortals. When it comes to the decider of Overpass, I don't think Immortals are bad on it. I think they're a pretty decent team. My problem is, I actually think that at least with the Makalele lineup, Nip was really doing work on that map. They really could get some T rounds off, and they could win a lot of the games against a lot of key opponents there. So bearing in mind, one of their losses was to SK, one of their losses was to Na'Vi, 2 of the teams who've actually been pretty decent on that map. I actually think when it goes to Overpass as the decider, if Nip doesn't steal Cash and just win 2-0, which can happen, probably it's going to be 2-1 to NIP because they're going to win Overpass as the decider.